Confused about which gaming mouse to buy? This video is gonna solve that. First, I'll teach you the 7 key elements of choosing a gaming mouse, with the last being the most important. Then I'll give you my top 5 recommendations with Amazon links below. Let's begin. In 95% of cases, your sensor, the thing that literally tracks where your mouse is and how far it goes, you really shouldn't worry about it. Let me explain why. Most sensors are made by a company called PixArt, with companies like Razer and Logitech and some others that make their own. However, this will most likely make the least difference in choosing a gaming mouse, especially when you're a beginner, because if it's not made from a company like Razer or Logitech, which by the way just make great sensors, if it's not made by them, it's going to be made by PixArt, which means it's going to be great. As most PixArt sensors today in gaming mice, even cheap ones, are as good as you'll ever really need them to be. Okay, now this can make an actual difference: polling rate. Polling rates work essentially the same as your monitor's refresh rate, how many times it refreshes per second. So 99%, basically all gaming mice have at least a 1000 Hz polling rate, which means 1000 times per second it's updating. But for wireless mice specifically, you'll see this thing called a 2.4 GHz USB dongle. And a lot of times you'll also see Bluetooth. These are 2 different ways to wirelessly connect your wireless gaming mouse to your PC. But there is a huge difference between those two. See, using Bluetooth maxes out your polling rate at 500 Hz or lower. It might even be lower than 500 Hz, and it increases your latency, which you want the lowest latency possible. This makes a huge difference to your accuracy, and because of this, you should never, ever use Bluetooth to game on. It will give you a significant disadvantage in-game. The 2.4 GHz USB dongle, on the other hand, is able to achieve a 1000 Hz polling rate, and because of the crazy awesome technological advancements, in a lot of cases we're able to see 4000 and even 8000 Hz polling rate in wireless gaming mouse with that 2.4 GHz USB dongle, as well as having substantially lower latency. So if you're going wireless, absolutely make sure that you are not only getting a mouse that has the capability to do a 2.4 GHz USB dongle, but that you are using it with the dongle and not Bluetooth. Okay, but there is this thing that you'll see like 8000 Hz polling rate. Well, essentially that just means 8000 times per second instead of 1000 times per second. And this can make a difference. So is it something that you want? Well, if you're already so good at the game that your physical hardware is holding you back, then in most cases, yeah, it can make a difference, but especially if you're a beginner, you really shouldn't look at this. As well as the fact that 8000 Hz polling rates are typically only found on higher end gaming mice, and you really shouldn't spend a lot of money, especially for your first few gaming mice, and well, you'll realize why. Okay, so switches. Do you even know what that means? Probably. You probably do. But if you don't, it's basically the left and right click. Those things click things that are called switches, just like your keyboard, if you have a mechanical keyboard. They're literally just small buttons, basically. In most cases, deciding what is a good and what is a bad switch and click and all of those things really doesn't matter too much. Again, like polling rate and like your sensor, this is something that you kind of want to worry about later on, but really is not that super important. Similar to the sensor, very few companies here actually make their own switches. And this is actually a good thing because most switches on gaming mice are pretty dang good. Omron is the major manufacturer, but there's others like Kale and Hano. However, such companies such as Razer and Logitech, again, they'll make their own switches. Razer makes their own mechanical switches, meaning that the switch uses a completed or open metal circuit to actuate or deactuate, but they also make optical switches, which uses a laser that is then blocked, and then that enables an actuation. Now, on paper, this can seem like it's faster, and it technically is faster. However, the benefits there are pretty much null and void. The only difference there is that optical switches do have the ability to probably live longer than a mechanical switch, although in most cases, we're probably gonna outlive our mouse before the switches die, or at least we hope that they do. However, actually trying to find what switch is in your gaming mouse, not that really important. There are other key points that are far more important. What does matter when talking about your left and right click, however, is the physical design, aka the left and right clicks that are actually used to press that switch. Sometimes they can be a little bit looser, or they can wiggle, or they can have a lot of travel, which just means how far you have to click down that click to then, well, click. But in most cases, you should really worry about the other 4 things that we're going to talk about, as those are way more important. However, one note before we move on is that there is one switch that I will say is worth a consideration. See, even if Razer makes a mechanical switch and Omron makes a mechanical switch and Hano makes a mechanical switch, the benefits of maybe getting a higher end switch are minimal. They feel, yes, a little bit different, but much of this is due to the design of the actual plastic left and right click. That is, except for one, which is Logitech. They made a hybrid mechanical and optical switch that they put in the G Pro X Superlight 2, which is basically like the god tier gaming mouse. That's what a lot of pro gamers use, and it's pretty expensive, in like the $150 range. While all the other mice clicks kind of feel like similar, slightly better, slightly worse, the point of diminishing return is you get there pretty quick, if that makes sense. Yeah, well, this switch from Logitech, yeah, it's like better than all of the other ones, and its click is so freaking unbelievably satisfying and clicky. It is incredible. Now, the actual benefit of like performance is probably like none or almost none, but it just feels that good and sounds that good. Yeah, I mean, that's worth it when you have the money. But now, cables. If you're not doing wireless, this is something you need to understand. You're most likely gonna have a wired mouse if you're starting out and on a budget. Not necessarily, and I've included some wireless mice in the recommendation section of this video, but chances are you're probably gonna have a cable. So what do you need to look out for? Wired mice with cables used to be horrible. They used to be stiff and completely ruin accuracy by pulling the mouse. It was awful. If you grew up in a time where they had those stiff cables, oh my God. But that's just not the space anymore. Today, almost every wired gaming mouse uses what's called a lightweight cable. That design is essentially a really loosely wrapped fabric around a, well, very small light cable. And if you leave slack on it, so just leave some extra kind of laying on your desk, it honestly feels wireless. It very, very, very uncommonly pulls, and typically no one really does it better or worse. I mean, some are slightly better, but if it has an ultralight cable, 99 times out of 100, it's gonna be great. Wireless mice used to be the GOAT because you didn't have that stiff cable. That's not the case anymore here. If you're used to old wired mice and you're trying to get into gaming mice, don't let that be the reason that you get a wireless gaming mouse, because honestly, wired ultralight cables here are just that good. If you're getting a wireless gaming mouse, that's either because you're gonna be traveling a lot, moving a lot, maybe with a gaming laptop, or it's just personal preference and you prefer a wireless gaming mouse. But in my opinion, the actual like performance differences of not having a cable are pretty much null and void with these ultralight cables. And again, that's on pretty much all of them. Just if it says that it doesn't have an ultralight cable, don't get it. It's definitely not worth it. Now, these are the things on your mouse that, well, makes it skate, glide, drift, whatever you want to call it. And honestly, this shouldn't have to be a point that we talk about, but unfortunately, many brands still mess up their designs and implementation, and but this is one of the most important things that you need to actually get information on before you buy your gaming mouse. Designs here can change the amount of drag, sometimes kind of like a scraping feeling. What you want is no scraping feeling at all. You just want it to glide perfectly over the surface. Many cheaper gaming mice here have inconsistent drags based on which way you're pushing it. So sometimes to the left and right is smooth, but up and down is not smooth. This can mess up consistency and therefore accuracy. Now, on most budget gaming mice, you will have some amount of drag. You just have to kind of expect that. Some is worse than others. So how much of that scraping feeling it has or not is definitely a factor. However, finding skates with no inconsistencies and no scraping or pulling, that is the goal. The other thing to consider with mouse skates is the speed. The more surface area that skate takes up on the bottom of that mouse is going to determine its speed. Essentially, how much resistance. If it has more surface area, you're gonna add more resistance and, well, decrease that speed, which in some cases is what you want, in other cases is not. This again depends significantly on the weight of the mouse and also personal preference of speed. So you can see here when we compare the HyperX Pulsefire Haste to the very expensive Logitech G Pro X Superlight 2, the HyperX has very small feet where the Superlight 2 has a pretty large surface area of skate. Now that's gonna slow down the G Pro X Superlight 2, which again is not necessarily a good or bad thing, it is just a thing. However, me personally, I really like a very lightweight mouse with then more surface area on the skates because that can add, to me, a level of precision without fatigue. However, on heavier mice that I play with, you do want kind of smaller skates. But with that, let's move on. Now this is two things together because they're very intermingled. DPI, or dots per inch, is essentially the raw sensitivity of your mouse. Higher DPI, higher sensitivity. Now, by raw, I mean that the DPI is strictly changing the mouse's physical sensitivity. So changing your sensitivity in game is an additional metric that will change your pointer speed. This again goes for changing it in your OS, your software, whether that's Windows or Mac or whatever you're using. Don't game on a Mac, but you get the point. The DPI strictly changes the raw sensitivity, with then other metrics inside of your computer is then going to also affect your overall sensitivity. And to further that, and to make you even more confused, your resolution of your monitor, so whether that's 4K, 1440p, or 1080, or another resolution, will also affect your sensitivity of your mouse. So DPI is not an absolute figure. It does change based on many different factors. But at the bare minimum, it is the raw sensitivity coming from your mouse to your PC or whatever you're playing on. But why does that matter overall? Well, there's a lot of different DPI players, so your personal preference for what your DPI is set at. A lot of mice will advertise crazy DPIs, 32,000 DPI. No one is playing at 32,000 DPI. No one's playing at 10,000 DPI. So those figures, take them and throw them away, because that is not useful information. Most gamers are playing between 400 and 1600 DPI. Some people absolutely play higher, and some people definitely play lower. I personally play between 400 and 700 DPI based on the game that I'm playing. If it's a little bit of a slower game, I'll typically increase my DPI to have a more sensitive mouse, decrease my work. But if I'm playing a game like an FPS game where I need to be hyper accurate, a lower DPI means more hand movement and typically more precision. However, how is DPI related to weight? Well, if you're running a lower DPI here, you'll be more accurate in most cases, but you'll also be physically moving your hand and mouse quite a lot more. So a lower weight is typically really appreciated here. This is what we call lightweight mice. Lightweight mice really start in the 70 grams and under category, with I think 60 grams being a really good benchmark for a quite good lightweight mouse in terms of just weight. However, if you're a 1000 plus DPI player, you're gonna play with substantially higher sensitivity, which means you're gonna be moving your hand less. A heavier mouse may actually increase your accuracy as it's a little bit more controlled. So the first thing to do here is dial in your DPI, figure out how you wanna play. If you're playing FPS games, a good place to start is lower DPI. We're gonna be doing big movements, but you still need really good accuracy and good precision. If you're playing more like simulation games like Hell Let Loose, Age of Empires, things like that, things that are a little bit slower, you're probably going to be a higher DPI player. So once you lock that in, that's when you can figure out, do you need a lightweight mouse, or can you go for a normal mouse, or do you actually want a heavier mouse? All right, but now we go to the single most important key factor when deciding what gaming mouse you're gonna buy. Yeah, this is by far the most important. Shape and size can make or break your grip, either making it easier to be precise and fast or destroying your gameplay. But at the same time, this can also be the hardest part to figure out what is gonna work for you. There is no one size fits all. Everyone will have a personal preference with their grip because everyone's fingers, hands, shapes of their hands, and their play style is completely different. Now, much of this unfortunately is done through trial and error. However, there are some things that we can do to kind of lead ourselves in the right direction. Firstly, if you're left-handed, you pretty much only have a choice for ambidextrous mice. Ambidextrous just means symmetrical, straight down the middle. It's a mirror copy of what's on the other side. So both left-handed people and right-handed people can use the mice in the same way. Most gaming mice available fit into this category. Now, if you're right-handed, you can choose either a symmetrical mouse or a right-handed mouse, and then on top of that, you have something that we call a right-handed ergonomic mouse. Now, right away, if you have smaller hands and you're right-handed, I'd just go for a symmetrical mouse, as many right-handed and especially ergonomic right-handed mice tend to be larger. But which shape we pick really depends on our grip style. The main styles here are palm, claw, and fingertip grips. Now, you can see this is what all of those look like. How do you pick what you do? Well, honestly, I would say just go to the closest mouse you have, regardless of what it is, and start using it either gaming or whatever you do, and see how you grip it. A lot of people will naturally do one of these grip styles. If you want to change that grip style, that's another video. But like me personally, I'm a palm gripper, and I'll probably always be a palm gripper. And if you're a palm gripper, going for a bigger mouse is definitely not a bad idea, because you have the most amount of leverage of any of the grip styles because you have so much weight, and the strongest grip on that mouse. Going for smaller, lighter mice becomes even more important if you fall into the claw or fingertip grip categories. All right, now that you know all 7 key factors on how to choose a gaming mice, these are my top 5 recommendations. Starting off in the number 5 spot with the Cooler Master MM711. Coming in at a price tag of $24.99. Again, if you want to check out any of these, there's Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links. The MM711 here is a medium-sized ambidextrous shape with a palm bump towards the rear. It's great for all grip styles, palm, fingertip, and claw. Although if you're palming it, it is smaller. So if you have quite large hands and you're a palm gripper, maybe not. It weighs 60 grams. These skates do have some drag both left to right and up and down, but it's very manageable. This also has an ultralight cable and uses Omron switches with a 1000 Hz polling rate using the Pixart 3389 sensor. Overall, this is the cheapest recommended gaming mouse on the list, but it brings it, having one of the best shapes at this price point and being an excellent starting point for any beginner. With that, we move on to the number 4 spot, which is the HyperX Pulsefire Haste. This comes in both wired and wireless variants, priced at $43.67 for the wired variant and $54.99 for the wireless variant. At the time of filming, these prices do change, so check the links below for current pricing. Now, this is a bit longer in length than the MM711. It's still an ambidextrous shape here, but with a less pronounced palm bump, making this best for fingertip and grip styles. You can still definitely palm grip it, I do, and it's great, but fingertip and claw, that's where it's at. The wired variant here weighs in at only 59 grams, with the wireless being slightly more at only 62 grams. The skates here have some drag vertically and horizontally, but it's very manageable and overall better than the MM711. The wired version has an ultralight cable and both use TTC golden micro switches. And finally, they both have a 1000 Hz polling rate, with the wireless variant having both a 2.4 GHz USB dongle, remember you want that, and Bluetooth capability. They also both use the Pixart 3335 sensor. Overall, a great budget wireless or wired pick for claw and fingertip grips specifically. But with that, let's move on to the number 3 spot, which is the Razer Basilisk V3, coming in at a price tag of $39.99 at the time of filming. This is a larger sized ergonomic shape, best for palm grips, but also suitable for claw grip styles. This weighs 101 grams. This is not a lightweight mouse. However, it also doesn't feel heavy for being an ergonomic mouse. The skates here glide extremely well with no pulling or dragging. This also has an ultralight cable and uses Razer's Gen 2 optical switches with a 1000 Hz polling rate and using Razer's 26K optical sensor. This is the best right-handed ergonomic gaming mouse on the market. Even though the price is great here, you're really not going to get much better than this for a right-handed ergonomic mouse. It's just not gonna happen. This thing is dang good. But with that, let's move on to the number 2 spot, which is again from Razer. They crush it in the budget space. This is the Viper V3 HyperSense, coming in at $59.99 at the time of filming. I think this is typically around $69.99, so not as budget friendly, but definitely a pick you should consider based on your price range. This is a large sized ambidextrous mouse, best for all grip styles here. This is battery powered only, so with a AA battery that's non-lithium, this weighs in at 83 grams. But using a lithium battery, you can get this down to around 70 grams, which is a substantial difference. The skates glide extremely well here. However, this does have a flaw that if you really tilt the mouse to the left or right, it can kind of pull on the mouse body itself, but the skates themselves are very good. Obviously, this is wireless with a 2.4 GHz USB dongle, uses Razer's Gen 2 mechanical switches with up to an 8000 Hz polling rate if you get their dongle sold separately, so you do have to pay more money for it, but you don't have to, and then it'll run a 1000 Hz polling rate. That is something that's kind of interesting for a future. And to finish it up, this uses Razer's 30K optical sensor. Now this is a great shape with the ability in the future to have an 8000 Hz polling rate, plus you get a little bit of play with the switching out the batteries. However, for some people it might be a con to have a physical battery, in which case the Pulsefire Haste would be the better wireless gaming mouse as it uses an integrated battery. That being said, the Razer does feel like a substantially more high-end product that they were able to offer at a lower price due to having a battery physically and then not including that 8000 Hz polling dongle in the box. All things to consider. But with that, let's move on to the number 1 best budget gaming mouse for beginners, for sure, the Razer Cobra. This comes in at a great price of $39.99. This is a medium-sized ambidextrous shape, great for all grip styles, palm, fingertip, or claw. It weighs in at an awesome weight of 58 grams. These skates glide very smoothly. This has an ultralight cable, uses Razer's Gen 3 optical switches, has a 1000 hertz pulling rate with Razer's 8500 DPI optical sensor. Overall, a fantastic choice for any grip style, a great weight and glide, and solid long-lasting components that make it easy to recommend to any beginner. But again, if you want to check out any of the 5 gaming mice, there's Amazon links below for the US, UK, Canada, and international links, and hopefully you learned something in this video. But if you're kind of wondering how mechanical keyboards work or the best ones for beginner, check out this video right here. That's another variant of this teaching and recommending style videos, which you guys seem to like. This is Christopher Tech Review, and I'll see you guys in the next video.